Welcome to the Orca. It's the complete opposite of what BC's construction unions claim. Documents obtained from the provincial government's Industry Training Authority show that open shop companies sponsor at least 4 times more apprentices than unions do. Jordan Bateman is the Vice President of Communications for the Independent Contractors and Businesses Association, the ICBA. The ICBA sponsors more than 1,100 apprentices directly, and he joins us here in the Orca studio now to talk about the seismic shift in how apprentices are being recruited, how they're being trained, equipped, and sponsored. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me, Rick.
So, the backbone of the ICBA is training and developing apprentices in the trades, which are so important. The numbers, though, that you have differ from the numbers the government has, so set us straight.
Well, they don't differ. The truth is no one really asked this question before. So to give everyone a little bit of background, when we were doing the community benefit agreement nonsense, John Horgan, that's his fancy way of saying union monopoly on publicly funded projects, one of the big pitches he gave was, well, the unions are so great at training people. They have all the apprentices. They do all the training in this province for construction. They're the only ones who care about the future. Therefore, we should give them our business. That was interesting because the ICBA is actually the single largest sponsor of apprentices in the province of British Columbia, with about 1,100 as of this moment. Now, the unions pushed back on us and said, well, 1,100, that's like, barely 2 schools worth for us. These guys have 1,100 apprentices, big deal. So we decided to ask the Industry Training Authority, who is training the most apprentices in this province? And what we found out was 83% of the apprentices in this province are being trained by open shop companies or associations like ours. Only 17% are being trained by the unions. So if you do want to encourage more apprenticeships, you should probably be going with the model that works, and that's the open shop model.
So what's the bottom line here? What does this mean for the community benefits, the government, and for you?
Well, it means labor costs are going to be way higher. So think about this. What these community benefit agreements stipulate is that you must join a union in order to work on these government-funded projects.
And one of 5 specific unions?
19 specific unions, yes. So there's a list of 19 unions. They have one thing in common. They all gave money to John Horgan's re-election campaigns, about $2.5 million worth over the past 2 or 3 cycles. So you have to join it. Now, these agreements also, they don't stipulate, but they target a certain number of apprentices who must be working on these projects. So, obviously, you build something, you want to try to be training the future generations of construction workers in order to continue the employment cycle. You want to continue to bring people into the industry. The problem is, it's going to drive up labor costs because the union has so few apprentices. We have all the apprentices. It's really a secret backdoor way to try to take young workers out of the open shop and put them into unions.
I was going to ask, how will this affect your members?
Well, it's affecting us in different ways. First of all, there are some members who refuse to bid on these contracts outright. Some have joined us in a lawsuit against the provincial government on these collective or community bargaining agreements. Others have refused to bid some of the first projects that have come up. And not surprisingly, the first tenders went out and they've come back higher than expected for the BC government. They're already $25 million over budget on a 2-kilometer expansion of Highway 1 east of Revelstoke. Problem with that is that you're already $25 million over budget. You haven't put a shovel in the ground yet. So this is bad news for the NDP labor model. For us, it's a chance to be proud. We should be proud of the fact that we are the ones building the future of this industry. We're the ones who sponsor 96% of welding apprentices in the province of British Columbia. Welding, kind of important when you're working with steel and iron and all these things. We're the ones who sponsor 87% of the plumbers apprentices in this province, or 85% of the carpenter apprentices in this province. And it's a chance for us to really get our message out to the public at large. Don't believe, just because something was true in the 1970s, doesn't make it true today. And now 50 years later, the open shop has really stepped up and is leading the way in training and benefits and apprenticeships.
Is there fear by some of your members that if the CBA goes through and becomes law, that some of their journeymen and their apprentices might be poached by these unions, or their people may voluntarily leave to find the work?
I'm not worried about them being poached as much as we are worried about them not being able to work on these projects. So what you don't realize is that if I own a construction company and I'm a successful bidder on one of these projects, I actually have to fire all my workers. They have to then go and join a Crown corporation, become employed by a Crown corporation, and they get sent out by a hiring hall. Maybe some of them come back to me. maybe the union sends some of their diehards over to
You might lose some of your best employees.
You lose your best employees. You lose any continuity you have. Like safety is the most important issue on a construction site. Getting home safe, work safe. And that is built through cohesion between a team. When you work as a team together, you know what John's good at, what John's not good at. And, you kind of get used to each other, and you know the safety procedures backwards and forwards, and you've been doing the training together, and you've come up together, you work together well. Now all of a sudden you have strangers kind of inserted into the mix who may have different safety training or may have different views of the way work goes on. That is problematic for our companies, and that's one of our big concerns that no one ever wants to talk about, because it's sort of how do you quantify that loss of safety and efficiency, but there definitely will be one.
There is an opinion piece, there is a lawsuit, as we know. Have you had any feedback from the government on this?
Yeah, the government just turns a blind eye to all of this stuff. This is NDP dogma. This is like ideology for them. This is as core a principle as they have, favoring the unions who basically power the apparatus of their party. The head of John Horgan, one of his key staffers, is married to the head of the BC Federation of Labor. Like, we understand, we get it. We know that is their model, that is their belief that everything would be great if we went back to the 1970s. The problem is, the world's not going back to the 1970s. We are 50 years on from that 70s model. Now 85% of construction workers in this province are not represented by these building trades unions. 82% of apprentices are not represented by these construction unions. So we need to get past this old model and look forward.
Does history not teach us, though, that a similar project like this happened with the Island Highway?
Yes.
Which was long overdue and well over budget when it was completed.
Yeah, and shrunk in scope. And in fact, they're still trying to build the pieces that were promised to that 25 years later. You're exactly right. One of the eye-glazing, dumb comments of the year in BC politics was a assertion by the NDP that these kind of agreements would only drive up labor costs 4 to 7%. So 7% max. Well, the problem with that is we know from the Island Highway experience, it was more than 35%. And we know from this first contract led on the Revelstoke Highway 1 project that it's more than 35%, and we're not even in the ground yet. So we know that it's false. The people bidding the projects know it's false. The people pricing the projects know it's false, but the NDP do it anyways.
I have a very close friend in the construction business, and I asked that person, are you an open shop? Are you a union shop? Their answer was, we're a bottom line shop.
Yeah.
How important is that?
Well, it's absolutely important. So if these companies cease to exist, people aren't working. People are unemployed. Things aren't getting built. That is not a good thing. Listen, at ICBA, we're not all purely open shop companies. We have employee associations, that share profit. We have progressive unions like CLAC and like the Canada West Construction Union. We have these different pieces in play, but the building trades are such a restrictive, old school way of doing things that these progressive companies just can't deal with their line of thinking. It's just like going back in time 50 years, and it doesn't make sense in the world we are today.
So finally, Jordan, what's the next step?
Well, the next step for us is getting this information out to people. Like, listen, if we want to continue to encourage the next generation of people to come into construction and trades, we need to continue to encourage open shop, because they're the ones training these apprentices, finding them, sponsoring them, making sure that they have what they need in order to be successful. So we're going to continue doing that. We're going to continue to be the #1 sponsor directly, and we're going to continue to make sure that Open Shop is training the lion's share of our construction apprentices in this province.
All right, Jordan Bateman with the ICBA on the Orca.